Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. This is where we discuss all things related to the doctoral journey. On this show, I share personal stories and bring some friends along for revealing conversations about their journey and provide inspiration for others to level up as doc students. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus. I'm a doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working full-time, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life. And now I'm on a mission to create community for other women of color to complete their doctoral degrees. This is real talk to help you along your doctoral journey. Now, let's get to the show. Hey, Dr. Emmanuela here, and before I jump into this week's episode, I want to let you know about a new ebook that I have coming out called Taking Charge, a career guide for graduate students, which will be available October 13th. In the book, I walk readers through the importance of establishing your values and how that sets the stage for your job search, the importance of networking and establishing a personal brand, and a whole lot of secrets from recruiters that they wish all applicants knew. This book is for graduate students and specifically students of color who are often ignored by institutional actors. Think career centers, faculty, administrators, the list goes on and on. I wrote this book to help women of color graduate students find their why in the midst of invisibility in the ivory tower. I want to empower you to know that you have everything you need to succeed, even if it's unfair that you don't receive the support you need from faculty and career centers. While I'm all about supporting women of color graduate students, this book is for everyone. This book is for you if you want to be in the driver's seat of your career search. This book is for you if you feel like your graduate program hasn't prepared you for a career outside of academia. This book is for you if you want to be strategic about your future. This book is also for you if you want to be intentional about cultivating success that aligns with your values and purpose. I'm inviting you to join my ebook email list to get information about the pre-sale as well as behind the scenes information about the writing process and other cool things that I would like you to know. So if you want to join now, go to my website, dremmanuelaconsulting.com, click ebook on the top menu bar, and it'll take you right to my ebook email list. So do that now and share with others that you think would benefit from this. Now let's get to the show. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. This is Emmanuela, and today's show is going to be a little different and unexpected for some of you. I planned on discussing grief this season, but my plan was to do so by discussing grieving a career. But little did I know that I would be engaging in one of the most difficult grieving processes of my life to date, which is the death of my father. If you follow me on Instagram, and we all know, depending on the day that you go on and the algorithm, you may know that I shared that my father passed away unexpectedly. I totally didn't see that coming, and it has rocked my world, and I have honestly been on a roller coaster of emotions as I try to take care of myself and acknowledging my feelings, but also being there for my mother and my siblings. This news has really impacted everything. And it's so interesting how, as a society, you're really expected to quickly move on after someone passes away, but that's not how life truly works. And, when I talk about that, I'm thinking about like bereavement days, right? And at work, a lot of times you'll be lucky if you have, 3 days of bereavement. And that's not even like scratching the surface in terms of the time that you need to plan, funeral arrangements and things like that, much less actually grieving. Not sure if you all heard the last solo episode that I put out. It was actually supposed to go out on August 3rd, but it didn't get put out until August 17th, I believe. And, August 3rd, I woke up to the news that my father went to sleep and he just didn't wake up. And so didn't get a chance to put that out until the 17th. And in that, I announced that I would have an ebook that would be coming out at the end of August. But, that wasn't going to happen with the kind of news that I received. So I'm over here just trying to pick up the pieces. The book now will be coming out next month. And so I'm in, this space of grieving, but then also trying to see what life looks like now, because I'm different, right? I've been changed. I'm forever changed with the fact that my father's no longer here and just what that all means. So don't know how this episode is going to go, as my feelings about my father's death are very raw. And so thank you in advance for your patience as I navigate this topic with you today. I want to talk about navigating grief in general, and I'm going to talk through my experiences of grief, which includes grieving my 17-year career in higher education, as well as grieving the death of my father. However, it's important to know that grief can come in a number of different packages, like losing the loss of a relationship or friendship, the loss of independence, perhaps, having to depend on others, the loss of a loved one, or whatever it may be. I have to start by sharing back in May, I transitioned to a new job that was outside of a campus-based higher ed position. Up until that point, I had worked for the past 17 years in higher education, working in large Research One higher education institutions such as University of South Florida, Florida International University, and most recently, Florida Atlantic University. One of my ultimate career goals was to reach the ranks of Vice President of Student Affairs, which is the goal that many people have who pursue a graduate degree in higher education. I've previously shared on this podcast that I pursued my doctorate to make meaningful change for students who look like me. I have often found myself in meetings, events, spaces that were largely made up of older white men or women, and I wanted to challenge their way of thinking and operating. And in addition to that, make higher education better for folks who look like me. And I feel like having someone who looked like me in those higher roles would make things more inclusive, more welcoming for students who look like me. And I thought that through obtaining a terminal degree, I could open up opportunities for myself and limit the amount of closed doors that I might encounter as I try to move up the ranks. There are a number of things and experiences that led me to change my mind. We definitely don't have enough time on this podcast for me to go through all of these reasons, but one of the reasons relate to how invisible I felt at an institution where there were a lot of complications. And what I'm going to do is name institutions in an effort to affect change. Like, it does no good to protect the institution by not naming them, especially when they did nothing to protect me, right? Or protect you. So this is my little form of activism here. And so I'm going to talk right now, specifically about Florida International University, which was an institution that I worked at, but it's also where I graduated with my bachelor's degree as well as my doctorate degree. I loved FIU. I loved the institution. I chose the institution when I was applying for colleges in high school. You know, FIU was a school that I said, yes, I'm going to go ahead and apply to that, and I want to go there. I was excited to go. I'm a proud alumni. However, the institution didn't love me back as both a student as well as an administrator at the institution. I've talked extensively about the unwelcoming messages that I received in my doctoral program. So see any past episode for more of that if you want to do that, but I'm not going to go through that today. What I haven't shared are some of the things that I've experienced while working as a professional. Black women administrators were disappearing from my institution. In the span of 2 months, which was pretty close to when I decided that I would leave, I knew of 4 Black women who left the institution. And that might not sound like a lot of people to you, but, you know, the reality of it is that we didn't have a ton of representation. So these departures of talented Black women professionals was alarming to me. And these were, some of them had their doctorate, some of them had been there for, more than 10 years. And so you're losing this institutional knowledge. And I felt that the institution did nothing about it, and we're talking about a year after a lot of these institutions were coming out with these statements and commitments to diversity, yet they weren't creating a space that was nurturing for these women, a space that was welcoming, a space that told them that they belong there. And so therein they left those institutions. And I remember myself personally expressing interest in moving up to various folks who had the means and power to make things happen. And I was met with advice to give more free labor, like joining committees, joining diversity committees too. For me, it's like, I can't believe that I was given this advice, especially after completing my doctorate. I had went through the 4 years of arduous work connected to my doctoral degree, and yet I was told to do more. I was already burnt out, and it was super hurtful to get that type of feedback. And it was particularly hurtful given the fact that that feedback was given to me by one of the highest ranked Black women at the university. And she was in a role that I would consider, being the only, right? And it seemed like she was invested and perfectly fine with keeping it that way, where she would be the only, Black person in the highest levels of the institution. I think that it's really important for me to say FIU and to name this because FIU is not a predominantly white institution. It is a minority serving institution, or more specifically, a Hispanic serving institution. Theoretically, one would think that these types of institutions would be more welcoming than predominantly white institutions. But what's fascinating and interesting is that these institutions receive the label because of the makeup of their student population. So there really isn't anything intentional about their practices or missions or whatever that really makes it an inclusive space. What ends up happening is that they take on similar anti-Black policies and procedures that predominantly white institutions do. It's confusing when you're in the middle of this because you don't know what's happening. And it's hard to name a thing if you're in these spaces and these kind of anti-Black things are happening. And just want to share a side note that this phenomenon is what inspired me to write my dissertation on the experiences of Black women attending a Hispanic serving institution. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes for my dissertation research if you want to learn more about that. But the women who graciously shared their stories in my dissertation really point out the interesting phenomenon that takes place at Hispanic serving institutions. So, long story short, with all of these things, and there's more stories that I can share, but that's, just a couple. Long story short is I had to grieve. I had to grieve my career. I worked so hard to get where I was, and sometimes still feel as if I have like some unfinished business in that area. However, I have to be confident with the choices that I have made. I am exploring this new career path, and it doesn't mean that I can't go back. If anything, what I am learning and will learn on this new journey will make me that much more of an asset if I choose to go back or wherever I choose to go. So for now and since then, I have been mourning what could have been. I am reaffirming myself every single day. I'm reminding myself that I'm not a failure or a quitter when it came to my career in higher education. I went through the exercise of exploring what I want for myself and my family and realized that traditional higher education was not going to get me to those goals and lifestyle. I had to make a change. I had to get in the driver's seat and go after the opportunities that I wanted. As for the death of my father, I am also mourning what could have been. I feel like I had so many more conversations that I wanted to have with him. So many questions that I had that I will never get answered. I also worked through the sadness and pain associated of what I could have done. Perhaps I could have been a better daughter, been closer to my dad, called him more, and the list goes on and on. It's hard and challenging because the mind wanders, and before you know it, you're down this deep path of regrets. And what I am learning is it's important to find joy and solace in the moments that you did have, right? And that's something that I'm working on. And I'm doing that in both the loss of my father, but then also the end of a career, right? Just not having regrets, but finding joy in the moments that I had, the things that I was able to learn, and how that has informed the person that I am today. Now, with the whole idea of a career ending, the Great Depression makes things seem so glamorous, and I just really wanted to share a side that isn't often discussed, which is grieving, the grieving process associated with grieving a career that you left behind. While you leave that other path behind, it's important to know and note that your previous path is still with you. The skills and experiences that you had isn't all of a sudden, trashed or not valuable. The skills and experience that you gained over your past careers inform the way that you navigate in your new space. These are things that you take with you. These are things that make you that much stronger in your new role. The time spent wasn't a waste of time. Your previous career path offered opportunities to build your skills. And again, these are skills that will help you with your new career or new endeavor. Now, having said that, I offer some of my advice related to grief, which is based on my personal experience. And I offer this up not to give you something else to do, but just to put it out into the universe should you be looking for advice on some things that you can do personally. So, the first piece of advice that I have is associated with therapy. I know that this isn't easily accessible to everyone, but if you are able and willing to seek therapy, I definitely recommend it. I already had a therapist, but one thing that I found helpful was increasing my sessions. I was going monthly, but then I increased it to every other week and will probably go to monthly once I feel a little bit more comfortable. But I found that very helpful and something that I looked forward to. For both my burnout, which led to my career change, and the loss of my father, my therapist was and is still helping me through the process of processing my feelings and thoughts, and also helping me to establish productive coping skills, which I have found invaluable. So that's one piece, to seek therapy if you haven't. The second thing that I would say is to take care of yourself. And by that, I mean eating and sleeping. These are basic things. And when you're in the moment of grieving, these are the things that can easily be forgotten. When it comes to eating, and I saw this as well, you don't have an appetite, or you're so stressed out, or you're so busy doing other things that you can easily skip a meal or two without even realizing it. So my advice would be to set reminders, maybe on your phone, or eat and sleep on a schedule. So eat before 9 a.m., eat before 1 p.m., eat before 7 p.m. And by doing that, you have some type of routine and making sure that you are getting something in you throughout the day. And then, going to sleep by 10:30. And there were times where I just laid there. I couldn't even go to sleep, but at least I was in the bed and trying my best to get the rest that I needed. So, that's my second piece of advice, is taking care of yourself and taking care of those basic needs. The third thing that I have is to not compare yourself. Grief looks different for everyone, so be kind to yourself. You have no idea how you will respond to grief. Your grief won't look like anyone else's. And it's important to know that life continues as you're grieving. And it's important to get comfortable and familiar with grief as you're lifing. Grief can be sad, it can be anger, it can be shame, it can also be laughter. And by the way, you can have and experience both grief and joy. A lot of times it's happening at the same time. And so it's important to not feel guilty about joy that occurs while you're experiencing grief. Grief can and often looks like anxiety, especially because you have lost a sense of safety or control. Personally, I felt and feel super exposed. With my father's death, it was like, whoa, I need to protect my mother because she's all that I have. I need to make sure that everything is set up on both my end and my husband's side in case of either of our untimely passing. And that's a lot to process while you're grieving. But it's reality, right? In terms of my career, I felt and feel exposed as I'm embarking on this new journey and not entirely sure where it will lead me. And this is the first time in my professional career where I don't know what's next for me. In both cases, I need to recognize the journey is unique and to embrace all of the feelings associated with the journey. And so that would be my advice to you. Don't compare yourself. The fourth piece of advice that I have is to close the stress cycle. You heard me talk about this with Amelia Nagoski during the burnout episode. And if you haven't, give that a listen. It's such a great conversation. And the advice that she shared during that really helped me when I started and continue to feel anxious or stressed out. I know that I have to do something to close out that stress cycle. For me, it's been walking or doing some kind of physical activity. I've been walking almost every day, and that has helped me to get a sense of clarity, but also allowed me to have a place to release my anxiety around everything. So that would be my fourth piece of advice, which is closing the stress cycle. The fifth piece of advice is don't hold it in. If you feel it, let it out. It does you no good to hold in how you're feeling. Keeping it in will only hurt you physically because all of those emotions, anger, whatever, sadness will have nowhere to go. And so you'll probably start to feel various pain in different areas, shoulders, whatever the case might be. And so you have to let it out. Embrace it so that it doesn't impact you. Embrace whatever that feeling is. I know one thing that was helpful for me was grief yoga. I heard about it on a podcast, and yes, that is definitely a thing. You can find some on YouTube and things like that. That was helpful. Meditation was helpful. Crying was helpful. I also had this feeling where I had all of these different thoughts and nowhere to put them. I just felt like it was a million and one things in my mind going on at various times. And so I bought a new journal so that I can write those thoughts. And the act of journaling has been great for getting my feelings out there. And like I said, it gave my grief somewhere to go and was a release. So that would be my other piece of advice to you, is not to hold it in. And then finally, my last piece of advice is to take time off. Don't feel guilty about taking time off. I often tell myself that I've never been here before, right? In this feeling of grief. And so need to be kind to myself, need to be gentle with myself, and allow myself to take the time off that I need to heal. Learn to advocate for yourself by asking for what you want. If you're a graduate student, it might look like taking a couple of weeks off or a semester off or a whole year off, whatever it is. Do what's right for you. For others, it might mean taking time off of work without apology. Do what feels right to you, but take time off for yourself. So those are just a few pieces of advice that I would offer up for those of you who may be supporting others who are experiencing grief. I have a couple of things that I want to share just based off of my experience. One of them is to don't ask the grieving person what they need. I know personally, I received several messages from folks who were well-intentioned that, was like, oh, let me know if you need anything. And I didn't know what to do with that. And the fact that I got so many of those similar messages led me to believe that this is like something that people have learned to do based off of what other people have done. And it struck me as something that was superficial and performative. I think what you need to do is do something. Don't ask the person that's grieving to do more work where they have to think about something in a time when they don't have the space or time or capacity to do so. So, some things that I would have appreciated if someone did was sending me a meal so that I wouldn't have to worry about it, or sending me something that I enjoy typically, right? Maybe it's my favorite chocolate or candy or a drink or a meal that I enjoy that has nothing to do with grieving. So that would be my piece. Don't ask them like if they need anything to let you know. Just do something, whatever it is. The other thing I'd offer up is don't shy away from bringing up the person who has passed away. I remember listening to this other podcast. I love podcasts. That's why I have this podcast, but I also consume, a lot of podcasts. And in the midst of like early on, I started listening to podcasts about grief. And one of the things that I heard, and I'll put some of those podcast resources that I found helpful in the show notes as well for others if you're interested. But one of them that I listened to mentioned how when her mother passed away, people stopped saying her name. She used to hear people would talk about her mother all the time when she was alive, but then when she passed away, no one, talked about her. And she had this thought about like, she doesn't want people to forget her mom and what her mom meant to her. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly how I'm feeling. I want people to remember my father. I want to remember my father. And by you bringing up my father, it doesn't make me sad. It makes me happy. It makes me happy that someone remembered him, and that, his life meant something. So that's my piece of advice. And I think most people will probably resonate with that as well. And so, don't shy away from bringing that person up. And I know too, another piece is, sometimes you don't know what to say. And I think, just don't be weird. Just be yourself, whoever you were before this bad news happened. If you checked in on the person every so often, if you did certain things together, just continue to try to do those things and be there for the person. They may not be in the mood to do those things, or they might. Like maybe that's helpful for them, but don't assume things. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them about their day, about other things that are going on. Perhaps provide them with comic relief if that's typically something that you do. So, just be there. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't go missing. Be there. Check in on them. And don't be weird. So I made it. I'm super proud of myself for making it to the end of this episode and not crying, even though there's nothing wrong with crying. I hope that this episode helps those of you who may be experiencing grief, or maybe those of you who are supporting someone who is going through grief at this time. I honestly feel better now that I have talked a little bit about this. And so perhaps that's part of my advice as well, is to, if you are grieving, talk to others. You may end up feeling a little better as well at the moment. So if you think that what I've shared today can benefit someone else, please do share it. If you feel like sharing it on social, please be sure to tag me at Dr. Emmanuela on Instagram as well as Twitter. And I thank you for listening. See you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, rate the show, and leave a comment on Apple Podcast. You can also donate to the show by clicking the support link in the show notes. Your donations help me to continue to put out new episodes to help support you and other women of color doctoral students. I'd also love it if you could spread the word to other women of color doctoral students to grow our community. Be sure to also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emmanuela. That's DrEmmanuela. See you on the next episode.